So my name is Patrick Hines, and I'm actually with the Micro Focus company, which is actually the parent company of SUSE. And we're at the show today with a lot of things that run on Linux. So we have a number of solutions, and pretty much everything we have is based on Linux. We also support Windows, of course, but we also have a lot of tools, solutions, applications that are built with a Linux platform in mind and fully support Linux. So I wanted to talk today about two of our biggest solutions, and really the heritage of where these solutions come from go back to the Novell company, which was purchased by Attachmate, which was then purchased by Micro Focus. So a little bit of history there. And part of that included SUSE. So Micro Focus acquired both Novell and SUSE and a couple of other entities. So wanted to talk about file and print, and this gives you an idea of, we've all seen this, how the world has definitely changed. This is typically work, right? Lots of mobile devices and being able to work wherever you want. So be that on a tablet or a phone, and of course laptops. And the connectivity is rampant, 3G, 4G, 5G in some cases, and being able to connect and get back to the office. So typically this is what we remember in the past. So for example, Mary here, sitting in a cube on the 7th floor, I was able to deploy applications to her device. In this case, a classical desktop with a tethered RJ45 connection to the network. I used to have to commute to work, and I could not get to my applications, I could not get to my data until I got to the office. Made it very easy for IT, the old brick and mortar setup, right? I could control things, security was fairly simple, I could control access, and I knew how to get to my servers. And then of course things changed, and now I can work literally anywhere, including sitting on the beach in this case. So any folks remember this device? So, or how about what year this came out? When do we think this first appeared? Pretty close, pretty close. Randall was closer, 1977, the Apple first shipped, and it had, how much memory do you think it had? The first one, had 4K of memory, 4K. Similar to folks who were at the Air and Space Museum last night, I read how the Apollo 11 mission had about 4K of memory to deal with. So this device also, what speed do we think this ran at? Originally, the original processor. It was a 6502 processor, and it ran at 1 megahertz. 1 megahertz. Maybe that's megahertz, I'm not sure. And we can see on the side there, we've got, thanks for coming. You can see on the side there, we have disk drives, floppy disk drives, the old classic 5 1/4 inch floppy disk drives. And that's how I got to my files. That's how I got to my data. That's how I got to what I needed to work with. And then IBM came along. How many years later do we think IBM came along with this? Pretty close. 1981, the first one was sold. How much memory do we think it had? It was an 8088 processor with 16K. What speed do we think it ran at? 4.77, exactly. Give this man a prize. Give this man a prize. So they almost quintupled the speed, and they also innovated by putting those disk drives right inside. Again, that focus on files and data. It's one thing to have applications, but I can't do my job without access to the data. So IBM innovated and put those disk drives right inside the machine. And then this came along. When do we think this came along?
86.
Almost. 2 years later in 1983. It wasn't the very first cell phone because there were cellular phones being used in some labs, and the very first cellular phone call was made a little earlier, but this was the first commercially available cell phone from Motorola. First sold in 1983. What do we think it cost?
Oh, it was like $600. It's crazy.
A lot more.
2,000.
Lot more. More. $4,000 back in 1983, which is the equivalent of about $10,000 today. So you're looking at, yes?
Do you know who made the first cellular phone? Between each other.
I did actually read about it. I don't know it off the top of my head.
One was, they were between the two competing companies. One
Motorola and
the other one was, I can't remember. Ericsson. It might have been Ericsson.
or Bell Labs maybe.
But Motorola called them, so
We beat you. Yeah, similar to what a lot of us saw last night with the Russians shooting off the first satellite, Sputnik. just beating them, and then the States launched theirs, I think it was about 3 weeks later. So they were just behind, and then likewise Yuri Gagarin being in space, and I think it was only less than a week later that, was it Alan Shepard, I think? Yeah. So yeah, $10,000 would be the price today for this device. How about this guy? Anyone remember this? Exactly, the message pad, also known as the Newton, very much ahead of its time. Before US robotics, before any other tablets and smartphones we're seeing today, with handwriting recognition. First shipped in 1993. They sold about 7,000 total. They sold about 1,000 at Macworld, just south of 1,000 devices at the original Macworld. And then they sold about another 6,000, and then they discontinued it about 5 years later. Way ahead of its time, way ahead of its time. And then, of course, we jump to today. And today we've got a plethora of devices from a plethora of manufacturers with a number of different OSs. And then before this, of course, I mentioned US robotics with the Palm Pilots. HP and Compaq had devices before a lot of these. And then, of course, today it's largely an Android and an iOS world with a little bit of BlackBerry thrown in there. Kind of led to the Hillary Clinton scandal. I don't want to use a BlackBerry, so I'm going to use my own device, and we all know how that played out. So that's a picture of today. Everyone knows this, Angry Birds. Why do I have a slide with Angry Birds? Well, this is where IT has challenges, right? Mary's no longer sitting in a cube. Mary's no longer tethered. We don't have a brick and mortar. We have devices, we're working on the beach, but we also have bring your own device. And it's one thing to muck with my device and deploy applications to my device and potentially wipe my device, but you better not touch my Angry Birds high score. You better not touch the progress I have in my Angry Birds. I'm challenged with this. So IT now has this world with a bit of a divide in it where I've got my corporate applications and my data, but I've also got my personal world, my photos, my Angry Birds, my Pokemon Go, whatever it might be. And this is a totally unique approach and a totally new thing for IT to deal with. Anyone know what this is or where it is? Anyone? Anyone? So this is in Allen, Texas, which is just outside of Dallas, not too far outside of Dallas. It is the largest high school football stadium in the country. It seats upwards of 20,000 people for a high school football game. So again, you might be asking yourself, why do I have this slide? Well, this introduces a whole other new thing for IT, and that's I'm on the Wi-Fi at the high school. But then I'm also at the football stadium just outside of the high school, and I'm still on the school's Wi-Fi. And whether I'm with a school device or a personal device, what am I doing with that device? And you might get into challenges of students taking pictures up the cheerleader skirts, for example. And now I've got a huge problem on my hands. The administration has to deal with this, and IT, again, is thrown a curveball. Something, again, we think back to that brick and mortar structure. This introduces a whole new plethora, right? Whose Wi-Fi am I on? How did I get authorization? What applications am I allowed to use? And it introduces all of these new challenges that, back in the 80s and 90s were, not even on the radar. They weren't even scenarios people were thinking about, let alone dealing with. So there was actually some concrete issues with this stadium where the concrete didn't cure properly and they almost had to tear the thing down, but they were able to reinforce it. So introducing a lot of different things that have changed. So there are currently about 6.8 billion people on the planet, and we have about 5.1 billion smart devices on the planet. So almost one-to-one. Not that everyone on the planet has one, and of course many people have multiple devices, but just puts it in perspective. 5.1 billion devices, and this is as of early 2016, so this number of course has exploded. I also read that last calendar quarter, for the first time ever, there were more cars activated on cellular networks than phones. And of course, there are far fewer phones being sold as people have phones already. And there are a lot more cars that are 4G, 3G, 5G enabled. So there were more automobiles activated on cellular networks than phones last quarter for the first time ever. So we're seeing that pass. Kind of like back in the day when laptops outsold desktops for the first time. So we're seeing that tipping point. There are about 300 different devices from different manufacturers, different flavors of devices that are on the Android platform alone. Apple, of course, with their walled garden and proprietary approach, have fewer devices as far as the flavors, but Android, name your current favorite dessert, they've got a version of an OS and over 300 different devices on that platform. Very pertinent to the Air and Space Museum last night, the Apollo 11 mission, you know, the average cell phone, just the average smartphone has more power, more RAM, more CPU, more applications than the entire Apollo 11 mission. And then lastly, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this, more than half of 2-year-olds use a mobile device on a regular basis. And you can often see the, you know, the 3-year-old is teaching grandma how to use her iPad. How many of you wake up in the morning and before your feet touch the floor, you look at your phone, right? And don't be shy, it's okay to admit it. But that's the world we live in today, right? This is gold, right? That's the first thing we grab. What emails came in, what news, what happened while I was sleeping, you know, what do I have to deal with? Take a look at my calendar before your feet hit the floor. That's how tight this is getting. But at the same time, a lot hasn't changed, right? These things still go missing. These things are still stolen. There's sensitive data being left behind in airports. 5.2 million cell phones were lost or stolen in the United States last year in 2015. 5.2 million. I actually left my laptop at O'Hare once coming back from a trip, fortunately on a Friday, and I was back through O'Hare on the Monday, and I was taken into the room. I don't know if anyone's been in the room at O'Hare or any airport for that matter, where they have all of the left behind laptops, and I'm talking it with stacks and stacks to the ceiling, and largely black. Fortunately, I had a MacBook, so it stood out a little bit, and I had my name and phone number on the bottom, so I was able to retrieve my MacBook. But you can imagine how your heart drops when I got home, and I lifted my laptop bag off of my roller bag, and that seems a little light. And I was like, wow, I left my laptop at the airport. So it happens. And when they are stolen or broken into, breaches, right? The cost of a breach from almost $10 million in the retail world up to over $20 million in the financial world, about $15 million in the tech world, and a little north of $10 million in the communications industry. So extreme cost, right? You can also see over here, over 1 billion records were breached in 2014. They don't have full stats on 2015. A lot of things got more secured, but you look at, you know, the millions of Home Depot, Target, TJX, right? The list goes on. Sony, you know, how much does Sony wish they didn't have the data they had sitting around on those machines that were breached, right? And the Ponemon Institute actually awarded the dubious, infamous award of the Year of the Breach, 2014. And nearly 25,000 laptops are lost or stolen at US airports every week. Just at airports, 25,000. So similar to my experience. So while a lot has changed, a lot hasn't changed, right? We still need to protect the data. It's all over the place. I've got personal info melding and mixing with corporate info. I've got multiple OSs to deal with, and people are working and connecting and all over the place. Very different world to try to secure, but at the same time, a lot of the same challenges. So let's talk about files, right? We've talked about disk drives, we've talked about IBM and Apple and some of their innovations. You know, the great question is, where are your files, right? And you recognize some of these logos. I'm storing them in Box, I'm storing them in Google Drive, OneDrive. I've got them on network shares, I've got them on local shares, I've got them on thumb drives, you name it, you know, dealing with files. And then very pertinent to this is a Dilbert that appeared earlier in April this year. You know, can you send me the file? Well, how do you want it? Email, Dropbox, Google, iCloud, AirDrop, Creative Cloud, you name it. Well, surprise me. Well, the surprise will be if you find it. And there's classic examples of what version do you have? I'm working from this version, that version. Well, Mary put it up in iCloud. Didn't you grab it? I don't have an iCloud account, you know, et cetera. And eventually you get into a little, you know what? I'll see you on LinkedIn. So keeping track of our files and being able to share our files, a huge challenge. And again, one thing to get access to the applications, but what about the data? And you have the classic, the newbie is hired, comes to the meeting, and people are talking about the H drive or the X drive. And I don't even have access to that. And you'll hear from a lot of the folks in the identity management world about 0-day start and 0-day stop. Well, often 0-day start is on the day I started, I had 0. I couldn't get into the building. I couldn't get the gate to open in the parking lot, let alone get my credentials to log into to my device. And then guess what? I don't have access to these drives. I'm in the marketing department and people are talking about the marketing folder and I can't even get in. I'm working in finance and they talk about the SharePoint instance I'm supposed to log into. I don't even know where to log in, let alone what credentials I would pass. So being able to share files and access files, and again, the classic HR question, do you have the tools to get your job done? And often no, I might have access to the tool, but I need access to the data. I have to get to the files. One of the solutions is the cloud. I'll put everything in the cloud, and you'll talk vendor after vendor, startup after startup. The cloud, the cloud, the cloud is the answer. But the cloud sometimes comes with some challenges, right? Not so simple, not so easy. The cost goes up on a monthly basis. I thought it was going to cost this much, now it costs that much. Well, you added this feature, and you have this much storage, and you went over a 10 gigabit bandwidth limit per user, and therefore here's your bill. And you're also entrusting all of this to someone else. You're also throwing this all up into the cloud. So what are you going to put in the cloud? Are you going to put your entire data center in the cloud? What's going to be accessed? What's going to be available? How do I know what users want and what needs? Let's say you're heading to the airport for a big presentation, and on the way you remember, we did a very similar presentation. I had this awesome slide from a pitch I did a couple of years ago. I wonder where that deck is. If I was sitting at my laptop, hooked up to my network and logged in, I would know exactly where to go. But is it in the Dropbox thing I just bought? Or is it in the Google Drive that my boss is telling me to use? And now I got to phone back to the office, and I'm about to board my flight, and I have to try to explain to someone where to find the file, and can they put it in Dropbox? What about this, your data center? You've got everything in your data center. In some cases, you've spent 40, 50, 60 years working on this. HP was talking about, I think they're talking about their 75th anniversary coming up. So a lot of folks have been spending a lot of time and decades securing their data center, building their data center, filling it with data, making sure it has the files folks need. So why don't we leverage our data center? And one of the biggest problems with the cloud, one of the biggest scary parts of the cloud, one of the things you keep hearing about is the security. Are my files secure? Am I meeting regulatory compliance? Am I able to prove that my files are secure? Are they available? Are they reliable? You hear about this all week with SUSE, right? Reliability, availability, security, right? Your data center provides that, and at the very least, you own the keys to that kingdom. You're not paying somebody else, and you're not putting that in the hands of somebody else, all of that risk. You also don't have the time. What about the time to move all of this? You're basically looking at when you go to a cloud solution and you want to provide files to all of your users, guess what comes with that? The baggage of a migration. What am I going to migrate? How am I going to migrate it? How long is it going to take to migrate? I don't have that time. And then, of course, my users, right? My users want it simple. I want to be able to, I've been working here for a few years. I know where the marketing folder is. I have credentials to get into finance. When somebody talks about the H drive or the X drive, I'm cool. I understand. I know. I don't have to learn something new. I want to keep it simple. I don't have the security concerns. I don't have the time to deal with this third party, this cloud solution that's supposed to be my nirvana. And I certainly don't want to be retraining my users. I need to keep it simple. They're already working. At the end of the day, here comes IT confusing me. So one of the solutions we have is known as Filr. And one of the big customers we have is the California Transit Authority, which is actually the 5th largest transportation system on the entire planet. They've got about 300 sites up and down the west coast of California, and they are sharing files with hundreds and hundreds of contractors. So contractor, not a user, not necessarily in my directory, not necessarily somebody I fully trust, but I need to get files back. They need to get a whole bunch of data back from these contractors across these 300 sites. Executives also worried about the sharing of these sensitive files. All sorts of pain from older FTP-based solutions. There's been all kinds of supposed file sharing solutions in the past. And would the legislature even let me use a third party? Do we even want to take on that risk? Do we want to deal with the time? Do we want to deal with the training? Everything I just talked about. So they've currently deployed this to over 20,000 employees across the entire Caltrans organization using our solution. City of Paris, same kind of thing. They're dealing with the citizens. Again, people that aren't employees, they're not necessarily trusted. Some of them are deliberately out there trying to throw a wrench into the wheels. So they want to deliver fast, secure access to personal documents, literally things like dog licenses, fishing licenses, parking permits, the list goes on, all of these forms, and they collect them back from all sorts of users across the city of Paris, and a very convenient user experience. So the solution we use is known as Micro Focus Filr, and that's F-I-L-R with no E, Micro Focus Filr. And this picture really shows you the conundrum, right? I've got all of this storage, and maybe it's a NAS appliance, and maybe it's a Windows server, maybe it's some sort of OES device from Novell, whatever that file store is, and then I've got these devices. And back in the day, as we talked about Mary on the 7th floor, tethered, right? RJ45 connection, I'm on the network, I can easily access these. But then I bring in all of the mobile devices I just talked about, or I want to hit it with a browser, or I've got some plugin via WebDAV, right? How do I get to these devices securely? So our answer is to drop in a SUSE Linux-based appliance known as Filr, a nice simple appliance. I can deploy it on a number of platforms. It's a soft appliance, and I point it to my storage, the storage I want to share, the storage I want to expose. I then have various ways of talking to it, HTTPS, REST, WebDAV, as I mentioned. I also attach it to my directory so I can authenticate, be that Active Directory or eDirectory, any LDAP compliant directory for that matter. I have it connected to that so I can deal with authentication and I can handle security. And I can then, based on that, decide what you get access to and how. I also support OpenID. So in the case of these, I thought these employees, I thought these contractors at Caltrans weren't part of Caltrans. I thought these citizens weren't part of the city of Paris. They're citizens of Paris. They don't work for the city of Paris. Well, I can have them come in with OpenID, for example. I can have them create an account on the fly and get access to what I'm sharing. I have a database built into the appliance so I can deal with all of the who, what, where, what do they have file access to, when do they get their access, what kind of access. They're allowed to get in this folder but not that folder. They can see this file but not that file. So I manage all of that in a database. I also fully index everything. And not only do I just index it, I index more, the metadata, obviously file name and the attributes around the file, but I also content index it so I can do a full text search. So if I want to look for the name Mary, I can find it in every PDF document, every Excel spreadsheet, every Word file. The list goes on. We support about 255 different file formats. And I can also subscribe to the shares. So I can subscribe via email. I can say, if this file changes, if this file's updated, send me an email notification. I can say, I want to watch this folder. When Bob finally adds that file I'm looking for, when those contractors have updated their status reports by the end of the week, I want to get an email notification. And then I can easily click on a link and boom, away I go, full access. Again, all sitting on my existing data stores, no third party, no cloud, no security concerns, no time wasted, no training involved. I'm hitting what I'm used to hitting and it's all in my data center. And then SharePoint, often a glorified file repository, and often, this part of the company is getting SharePoint and you guys will get it later. And later is next month, becomes 6 months, becomes a year, and it's convoluted, it's complicated, it's expensive. So we have the ability to plug right into SharePoint with Filr and access data from SharePoint just like it's sitting on the H drive, the X drive, what have you. So all of that inside of Filr. This is Filr. Whoa, what happened? Okay, I didn't move. So this is Filr sitting in it's actually my personal machine, and you can see I have a folder called My Files, and you can see I have a folder called Net Folders. Okay, hope this lasts. Net Folders, so here's my sales folder. Okay, so these would be sitting on the network. These are your classics, so picture this: marketing, finance. Here's some files for the sales engineering team that I'm a part of. Here's sales North America, and then shared with me, another collection of files that have been shared directly with me. So I have access to my personal files that I can share and access from anywhere, from any device, anytime. I have access to the net folders, AKA the H drive, the X drive, and then anything that's been shared directly with me, right inside of my operating system. Synced immediately. I add a file, boom, it's synced up to the data center. Somebody else adds a file to the folder at the data center, it's synced down to my machine. And you can see the checkboxes. Let me see if I can get my... So you can see these checkboxes. These files are actually local, whereas these files are not local. If I click on them, they'll come down on demand. I can preview them without them even coming down. So I can save on bandwidth, and I can show a file, I can look at a file, and it never even landed on my device. So if it's a sensitive file, if it's a file that I want to make sure is secure, I can decide what gets synced, when it gets synced, and if it even gets synced at all. And this is really starting to I don't know why it's doing that. Sorry about that. And that's inside of the OS. Here it is on an iPad, and I see my files, I see shared with me, and I see files that are coming from the net folder. I can see what's new, what's been added in the since I last logged in. I can see what's been shared by me with others. I can decide what to download, because again, all of this is sitting in my data center, and I can pick and choose when to sync it down to my device. I can search, and then of course your classic settings for configuration, what have you. So this is sitting on an iPad, could be an iPhone, could be an Android device, your choice. And then if I don't have a device, I don't have a laptop, I'm at the Marriott, I'm at the SUSECON conference, don't have my machine handy, I can go walk up to any machine that has browser access, and I can hit this from a browser. So here we are sitting in a browser. This is Safari in this case. Works with you name it, IE, Chrome, the list goes on, Firefox. And again, my files, so I'm clicked on my files now, so I'm seeing my files, but they're shared with me, files that have been shared with me, they're shared by me, and then net folders. So I click on net folders, I'll see my X drive, my H drive, again, my data center. So often when I'm talking about this and thinking about this, I love to quote Steve Jobs and change his quote a little bit, the late and great Steve Jobs, who stood on stage with the iPod. He pulled the iPod out of his pocket and he said, 1,000 songs in my pocket. I can pull my iPhone out and say my data center in my pocket. Didn't pay a third party, didn't spend time with the migration project. I'm not beholden and risk worrying about the risk of having everything in a third party. I simply point Filr at my data center and away I go. Immediately available, didn't have to sync anything, didn't have to migrate anything, don't have to pay a third party. All of that, my data center in my pocket. So a quick summary, put your data center in your pocket. Quick and easy to deploy. It's on a SLES-based appliance. So boom, soft appliance, easy configuration, boom, away you go. Share files and folders securely with the granular access control via Active Directory or eDirectory, role-based access control, whatever, the time you spent. In many cases, folks have spent a long time building an identity management infrastructure. Here's finance, here's marketing, this role, that role, VPs versus the janitor and what have you, and everything in between. I can leverage all of that, leverage what you've already have and all the work you've already done, right? Again, decades of time in many cases spent building and securing these data centers. Works with Active Directory and eDirectory. I can full text search the whole thing. Eventually, once I first point it at the appliance, I can get to the files day one, and after a little bit of time, it will fully index everything, and it will then allow me to do a full text search across all of the content. Bring the office to the beach with any device, right, to my earlier picture. Non-intrusive, right? I'm not having, going back to the remote control wrapped in masking tape. It's the same old infrastructure. It's the same file structure. All the users are going to see what they're used to seeing. They're not having to learn anything else. They're not having to learn a new tool. They're not having to navigate a new infrastructure, a new folder structure, what have you. Even make SharePoint easy to use, right? And everywhere I go, right? SharePoint, the pain, the discomfort, it's taking forever. I'm not part of the SharePoint deployment, right? Point it to SharePoint, away you go. Seamless desktop synchronization. The first screenshot I showed you was my laptop being synchronized from Filr. Boom, done. So that's Filr. Any questions before I move on? All good? Excellent. So let's talk about printing. And printing, obviously, in the mobile world is a challenge. AirPrint does solve some of that, but you need AirPrint certified printers, and most people are certainly not replacing all their printers. And often you have that on your iPad, on your Android, on your iPhone. Wish I could print this. How do I print this? And not to mention, even before mobile, printing is complicated and difficult, especially in the Windows world. You often run into drivers, and it's like, drivers? I took the bus to work. I don't even know what IT's talking about when they talk about drivers. So one way to solve that, printing from an iPad, is this. I don't know if folks have seen this before, but that's one option, right? And obviously that's not the ideal solution, and that's not going to work all the time and everywhere. So there's also the performance of printing. And so this is a use case from the state of Illinois, a great customer of ours, where they're currently supporting 18,000, and I think this number is approaching 40,000 desktops across the entire state. They had a large Microsoft printing infrastructure, and it was taking forever to print. There was confusion about drivers. You know, you often walk up to printers in organizations and you'll see an IP address literally stuck to the printer, you know, with one of these Brother P-Touch labels, right? You know, you think the average user understands this? Most users aren't sure what an IP is, let alone what to do with this address. Or IT gets smart and they have a system, right? So Mary on the 7th floor in the northeast corner, the printer's called 7-NE-brother, right? And she's supposed to do something with that. She's supposed to understand that that's the 7th floor northeast printer. It's a brother, therefore I need this driver, right? And it's like, whoa, this is already too complicated. It's complicated to explain, let alone expect a user to do it. So a fast, easy deployment, and they moved all of their older, slower Microsoft-based printing to iPrint. They boosted both the desktop and mobile printing performance by 6 times, 600% faster. So you add up all of these government employees standing around the printer waiting for a job to come out. I'm not even at the right printer, or my job never came out, right? And this just becomes you know, a huge cost, both in time and literally money. So as I said, we're about 40,000 desktops now. The deployment's growing, and it's been a huge success, and the state's extremely happy with the solution. We also have a chain of hotels, very expensive, a very high-end chain of hotels, Rocco Forte. I'm not sure if anyone in the room has had the privilege to stay at one of these hotels across Europe, the Rocco Forte hotels, where you see a lot of hotels here, I mean, I think even in the lobby here at the Marriott, where you can walk up and print. And so we provided that solution for the chain of Rocco Forte hotels, where regardless of the driver, regardless of the device, iPrint has the intelligence to look at the machine, knows what printers it's been attached to, sends the driver down if the driver's not already there. If the driver's already there, away you go. Supporting desktops, laptops, and mobile devices, right? So we can print, boom, from an iPad, any iOS device, any Android device, allow guests to print, right? That's at the end of the day, Rocco Forte wanted to provide what many of their competitors are providing, which is the ability to print, and you don't have to worry about what device might show up, and you don't have to worry about what printer you might have in the lobby. This is the iPrint solution. So very similar to Filr, using the exact same SLES base, just enough OS. We create a soft appliance, and I've got the same kind of problem statement. So you've got lots of different printers, right? So Xerox has a solution, Brother, Hewlett-Packard. A lot of these folks have a solution, but it only works with their printer. Or they claim that it works with multiple printers, but a lot of different printers are coming up all the time, and different models and what have you. So that's really the conundrum. And again, I'm tethered, I'm Mary, I'm on the 7th floor, I'm tethered, and I've got the drivers installed, and IT can maintain me. But then the mobile devices come along. So whose mobile device? It's a bring your own device, right? Same problem as before. And I'm all over the place. I'm at the beach, I'm here, I'm there, I'm connected via Wi-Fi, I'm connected via cellular. You name it, how do I get to these printers, and how do I keep it simple? So again, we drop in an iPrint appliance, and this is based on SLES again. It has a database to track all of the printers. We support AirPrint right out of the box, so you can AirPrint enable printers that are not AirPrint necessarily come AirPrint out of the box. So we've got AirPrint certification from Apple, and of course we support classic IPP printing. We tie it into a directory, just like Filr, so you can have authenticated printing. So often it's the color printer, right? You can't print to the color printer. You know how much it costs per page, so there's a lot of worry of who has access to the color printer, or sensitive documents coming out of the printer. So the admin sitting outside the CEO's office, he or she prints something sensitive. We got to make sure, right, that that doesn't just get picked up. So we can authenticate who's printing. We can also send, so we've got a guest sitting in the lobby and they want to print, they're about to walk into a meeting, wish I could print this. We can assign an email address to a printer and have the document emailed to the printer. It will take the document and print it. So that solves the problem, boom, of being able to have guest printing. And then we also build in render and a converter using the Stellent set of viewers that we have a partnership with Oracle that provides about 255 different file formats. So not only can you look at these files in Filr, for example, whether or not you have the application, but you can then print the files whether or not you have the application. So it renders it and or converts it and pumps it out. So Visio's a classic, right? You get a Visio document. Everyone's got Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, but they don't have Visio. Or they get a Gantt chart for project, right? Again, I've got Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Not sure what this MPP file is. So again, I can take advantage of iPrint to print that file. I can take advantage of Filr to look at that file. So pretty cool stuff. And then in the latest release, we provide walk-up printing. So the ability, Bureau of Prisons, we have a couple of friends from Bureau of Prisons here at the conference today. And we're working very closely with them to provide walk-up printing. What we mean by that is I send the job and it goes into a queue. And only when I choose to walk up to the printer and I can authenticate sometimes on the printer, sometimes with a badge card, or worst case, if I don't have either of those things available, on my phone, I can authenticate on my phone at the printer and it'll come out of that printer. I can print it tomorrow and I can go to the printer down a floor, other side of the building, walk up to it, so it will not come out until I ask it to come out. So printing on demand, walk-up printing, badge-based printing, we fully support that using the release portal functionality. So, in summary, enterprise printing, right? Simple, secure, and quick. And not just mobile printing, but just simplifying printing, going back to the drivers and the IP addresses and which printer, and am I on the right printer? Do I have the right driver? Do I have the right manufacturer, right? Eliminate all of that and do it quickly. Again, on a quick and easy to deploy SLES-based appliance, identical to the Filr appliance as far as the front end and the configuration. And literally allow users, right, not to deal with drivers. If they don't have the driver, iPrint provides the driver. If they're not sure where the printer is, iPrint will even provide a map. So you can put your floor plan for your organization and literally put the printers there. So I think finding yourself on a map, although not entirely simple, is much easier than trying to figure out how to print, much easier than trying to deal with drivers and IP addresses. So it makes it very easy, self-service, if you will, from end to end. Mobile ready, so we support Android and iOS devices, and we can print galore from that. Tie it into a directory so I can authenticate and have secure printing. Support all sorts of printing methods, right? If you can't print directly, you can print mobile via AirPrint, or you can print walk-up printing, or you can print via email. So lots of different ways to print, both secure and simple. Working with old and new printers. So we can even, depending on the models, there are some where we can AirPrint enable a printer that didn't even know what AirPrint was when it was first built. Point and click printing from the device of your choice, right? Very simple, easy to use app on just about any device. AirPrint certified from Apple, and we also support native Android printing. All of that with a quick and easy appliance out of the box. Any questions on iPrint? Cool. So, you know, rather than dealing with the cloud, which can get painful, has security risks, takes a lot of time, has a lot of cost, we provide a more utopian approach for files and printing. Enterprise file synchronization and sharing, as well as enterprise printing from desktops, laptops, mobile devices. And that's what I've got. Thank you.